Hi, it's Deborah Carter from New Tech Kids back again with another exciting edition of Preparation Tech. Preparation Tech is an interview series where I speak with inspiring technologists and people whose work relies on technology about what they do, what their story was, how they went from being a child to doing these amazing things. And it's really for parents, teachers, school guidance counselors, and kids themselves to get an idea of what kinds of things they could be doing to prepare for a future of technological innovation. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with Kate Edwards. She is the CEO and principal consultant for Geogrify, which is a whole consultancy around culturalization of digital content. Now, if you're like me, I had no idea that this was a field. And so it was really amazing to discover that Kate has really carved out this kind of niche for herself. So without any more talking from me, let's hand it over to Kate. Kate, welcome. Tell us what you do and tell us about us. Tell us your story, basically.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for asking me to be here. It's a privilege for me. This is super fun. So what do I do? So basically, I'm a geographer, and I'm also a cartographer, a map maker. And I found my way into the information technology sector mainly through games. And I basically created a field called content culturalization, where effectively what I do is I help adapt content for other cultures. So for example, if a company like Microsoft, where I used to work, if they want to make a product and make sure that that product is going to work well in other cultures around the world, like let's say it's in the Middle East or Latin America or somewhere else, I help them with that. I help them adapt the content. It's not just the language part. That's what's called localization, where we actually translate the language from English to Spanish or Arabic or whatever else. So I focus on other things, like the user interface, the design of the icons. I work on a lot of video games, so I help with character design and all these kind of different things. And then the other function I serve is I'm the executive director of an organization called the Global Game Jam, which is the world's largest game creation event that takes place every year in January. So we basically orchestrate all of these people around the world during one weekend creating games together. And it's just a super fun event.
Oh, sounds fun. So give us an idea of how these projects work. Can you kind of take us through a process? Say, maybe provide us with an example of a specific product, and then how does that culturalization process unfold?
Sure. So for some of the games I've worked on a lot of games like Halo and Call of Duty and Rise of Nations and Age of Empires and Rise of the Tomb Raider and all these other games. I'm currently working on Age of Empires 4 as an example. And so what happens is that the company will come to me and they'll say, hey, here's the game that we're going to be working on. And this is what it's about. This is the kind of characters that are in the game. This is the theme of the game. For example, Age of Empires deals with real world history, which can be very sensitive from different, in different markets around the world. And so I sit down with them at the early stages and we talk about what is this game they're creating? What's the world like? What's in this world? What kind of characters, what kind of different groups, and all those kind of things. And so I help kind of guide them at the early stage to help them understand what will or will not work in different cultures around the world. Because obviously most people who make a game or most people who make any kind of software, they want everyone around the world to love it. They want everyone around the world to enjoy it and to buy it. But you have to make sure that the content in those products is compatible with the different cultures. And so we'll talk a lot about what that means for that particular product. And then as the product actually starts being created, I get sent batches of content that I review, and I look through the content and I just kind of point out to them things that I see that may or may not work in different parts of the world. And that's basically how it works.
Interesting. So geography comes in handy, history comes in handy, cultural, social studies, all these things come in super handy.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. Tell us about the path. How did you get here? Like, where did it all start? Take us back to your childhood.
Well, it's a very strange path. So when I was a kid, I loved geography. I loved maps. I played with a globe that my brother and I had in our room, and I was always reading through an atlas for hours, just looking at the maps and kind of looking at these different places. I've always loved travel. My parents were both school teachers, so in the summer we always had the summers off, and so we often did road trips as a family, like all over the U.S. and a little bit into Mexico and Canada. And so I know for me that I really developed that strong love of not just travel, but exposure to new things and exposure to new cultures and new people and understanding how people do things differently in different places. So that was always exciting to me. I've always been a game player too. I mean, our family, like many families, we played a lot of board games, card games, things like that. My first video game was Pong, which was pretty much the first video game. So that's how old I am. And I've loved video games ever since. I never, at the beginning, never really aspired to work in the game industry, but I've always loved games, and I've been a gamer all my life. And I've always loved technology too. I've always kept up with the latest things going on. For example, when I did my master's thesis in geography, I actually did it about using virtual reality and augmented reality for making maps. And this was way back in 1991 when VR and AR were just barely getting started. So I've always had that interest in technology as well. And so, you know, I think among all of that, one of the most powerful things for me as a kid and even into my adulthood is I'm just curious about everything. I love learning, and even to this day, I'm 55 years old and I still love to learn. I'm so excited when I get to do discovery. So if I go to a new place or I get to read a new book, something I haven't read before, it's just that process of discovery for me is pretty much the foundation of my entire career. And so when I work on these games, every game is different and every game requires a certain level of research. So in a way, everything I work on adds to that process of discovery. So basically, I just love what I do.
And it shows, Kate. It really shows. Would you say that you create technology, or do you use it in your job, or is it a combination of both?
I think in my case, I use technology. I work very closely with technology creators, with people who create the hardware, create the software. I've been on advisory boards for different hardware projects, like creating, tactile sensory gloves for VR and things like that. So I'm very interested in the tech side and on the hardware side, but that's not my skill. So I work with those people closely, but in my job, I'm obviously a technology user. I rely on it very, very heavily to do my work. And yet a part of my work still as a geographer and cartographer, I still look at paper maps. I still go to libraries, and I still have to do old-fashioned research because that's really important to my job.
Awesome. You were at Microsoft. There's a lot of glitching in this program, but we got to roll with it because this is the age that we're living in. So you were at Microsoft. So if I understand correctly, you were at Microsoft, and from there you did the kind of the culturalization studies, and then you went out on your own as an entrepreneur. Is that correct?
Well, here's the way it works. So basically, I went into school with the intention of being an artist for Lucasfilm because I'm a Star Wars geek, and I'm a huge geek. I love Star Wars. I love Star Trek. I love Indiana Jones. I love all of that stuff. And so I wanted to be an artist for Lucasfilm because I wanted to work on a Star Wars movie. And I had the artistic skill. I would draw prolifically when I was a kid, and I did a lot of writing too. So I pursued industrial design. This was after 1 year of doing aerospace engineering because honestly, my first desire out of high school was to be an astronaut for real. I love space. I love NASA. I follow all the space program stuff. I think it's awesome. So I wanted to be an astronaut. But then I decided, no, I want to be an artist for Lucasfilm so I could work on Star Wars. I did a couple of years of industrial design because I found out that the people who did all that artwork had an industrial design background. And it really helped me improve my drawing skills for that purpose. But then I also realized that I love travel and I love culture and I love geography and maps. So I said, I'm just going to change my major to geography and cartography because I can still use my artistic skills with cartography.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I decided to do. And it was just, I, basically instantly fell in love with the topic. And one of the reasons I love geography so much is because I am such a curious person in about all kinds of things. Geography is a very broad category of field of study. So you can study all kinds of things under the label of geography. And I think that's one of the reasons I was so satisfied with it. So after I'd finished my bachelor's degree, I worked for a year as a cartographer, and then I went back to school, to graduate school. And then after I finished my master's degree, that's when my department at the University of Washington in Seattle, they got a call from Microsoft looking for a cartographer to work on Encarta Encyclopedia, which was, for a lot of kids today, they've never heard of it because that was the last encyclopedia. It was in digital form before Wikipedia showed up online. And so I got to work on Encarta Encyclopedia, and that's the whole reason I went into Microsoft in the first place.
Ah, okay. So you were there and you set up this culturalization thing, and then at some point you decided to set up Geogrify, right? And go out on your
Right.
own, kind of? Yeah.
Yeah. So once I was in Microsoft, I was hired to do a specific function, to do the mapping and to do what this geopolitical strategist work, which is essentially to make sure our maps are going to work in different parts of the world because different governments require the maps to look differently, like China
Oh.
versus India versus other countries. And it's something you have to follow very closely or else your map is not going to be allowed. And so I was doing that job, but then I started getting questions from all around the company around different geography questions and design questions and around cultures and things. And so I was inspired to create an internal team at Microsoft that I called Geopolitical Strategy. And so it took me about 7 months to get approval for the team. I had to have perseverance, and I wrote a proposal. I had to go to different vice presidents around the company, and I finally got to one who approved the creation of this team. And I think the reason he approved it is because he was the only VP I talked to who was not from the United States. He was actually from South Africa, and uh,
Ah.
and so he understood the issue very clearly because he had a different way of looking at the world. And so I created this geopolitical strategy team. And so for the next 7 years, I managed the team, and I basically put in place all kinds of processes inside Microsoft, which still exist to this day, to help the company be accountable for the cultural and geopolitical issues in content. And so after those 13 years at Microsoft, I left in 2005 to create Geogrify. And so I've been a self-employed consultant ever since.
Wow, I love your story because it's really showing kids that you can go to school and then you can go and work for a big company, because in big companies, if you're lucky like you were, they will allow you to do some great things, entrepreneurial things. But if
Yes.
you're a real entrepreneur, then it's a launch pad for you to go out and to actually do your own thing, whether you want to set up a business, a consultancy, or whatever. But big companies give a lot of people a good solid start. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
In terms of people doing, like, in your field, what are the characteristics and the mindset of people who are successful?
I think, a lot of the people I know who are successful, and I know a lot of them. I know a lot of people in the game industry. I know a lot of people in the tech field in general who've done very well for themselves. And I don't just mean financially, I mean just professionally, which to me is the important part. Because I don't do what I do for money. I do because I love what I do. That's the whole reason I wake up every morning. And I think for a lot of people who have been successful, one of the key factors is having that perseverance. It's that resiliency, which means, you don't, if you fall down, you get up and you keep trying and you keep trying and you keep trying, because nothing really comes easy. I mean, sometimes we can be lucky when we're in the right place at the right time, but honestly, for most things that I've achieved, I look back on my career and it's like I realized that I actually had to try really hard and I had to fight for it at certain times. And I don't mean literally fight, I just mean I had to show that kind of perseverance to keep moving forward. and believe in the idea that you had. I mean, like I mentioned, the geopolitical strategy team at Microsoft, it took me 5 tries with different VPs to make it happen. But the only reason I kept trying is because I knew that I had a good idea. And I knew because I asked a lot of my colleagues at the company, and they kept saying, yes, we need this, please make it happen. And so with that level of support I had around me, that's what helped kind of power me to keep trying and keep trying, and eventually it happened. So I think perseverance is absolutely key. I also think being a good listener is really important as someone who's successful, because we can sometimes get too wrapped up in our own heads and our own ideas. And so we have to be really open to listening to other people's feedback. Now, obviously, if they have, we want to listen to constructive feedback. If they're telling you things that are helpful, then we listen to those. If they're telling you things that are not helpful or destructive, then those are the kind of people you tend not to want to listen to. So you ask for constructive feedback. So we have to be willing to grow. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that we cannot be arrogant about our own skills. We have to recognize the fact that we will always be learning, and we're always trying to get better at what we're trying to do. And the only way to do that is to be open to feedback, and to actually listen to the feedback. And to me, those 2 skills alone, there's a lot of other skills I could point out, but those 2 things, being, having perseverance and being a good listener to feedback, are super important.
Absolutely. I totally agree. We, as especially cultures in the West, don't do it enough. We're too busy thinking about the next thing. And I catch myself doing that, especially as a journalist or a former journalist. But maybe you could talk about the different tech roles that you intersect with as a culturalization expert. So you've got the geography side of things, social studies, you blend everything, but what are the hardcore tech people that you interact with?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I love, is that, especially in the game industry, because a lot of people think that the game industry, it's like you're either just a programmer or an artist. Well, that's not quite true. I mean, in the game industry, there are all kinds of people who help put these games together. I mean, yes, some of the main roles that you have are the game designers, who are well educated in how games work and how to make them. So a lot of game designers might have programming skills, but then you actually have the programmers who do a lot of the coding and the building of the back end of the game. So that's really important skill. Art and design. So you've got the artists, you've got the designers, environmental design, character design, people like that. They tend to be more of the pure artists. Those are essential people. And of course, you have narrative designers and writers. They're extremely important, because someone needs to write that story, and somebody needs to create the script and define who these characters are. And so narrative design and writing are very important. Of course, there's all kinds of other functions. There's like localization people who help translate the language into other languages so the game can be played around the world. You've got culturalization people like myself, although there's not very many of us at all. And you've got marketing people who help get the game out there to stores and to help create campaigns. You've got legal people. Of course, you've got all the HR people, accountants, human resources. I mean, basically all the other functions that you would have at a normal company, you also have those at game companies too. And so when we talk about game developers or game creators, sometimes people think like only about the game designer or the programmer, but the reality is that every game you've ever seen has been created by a huge group of people with very diverse skills, and they're all adding to the final product in some way. And so that's one thing that I've loved about the game industry, is that you can bring your interests into this industry, and you can probably find a place for it, especially if you're creatively minded about how you can fit your skills into this job. I mean, and as I've told a lot of people, including a lot of students, if a geographer can find a way to work in the game industry for 27 years, anybody can, trust me.
I might have to try my hand at this too. So what kind of things would you recommend that kids study if they're into culturalization and technology? What are the fields or the study paths that they can take?
Well, I think there's a few. I mean, there is not a specific culturalization study area. I mean, I think my background in geography was particularly well suited for this job because products are created with the intention of being sold in different markets around the world. And so market being another term for geography or another term for country or region. So basically the way geographers look at the world, we look at the world from the perspective of location, and we're always about comparing the differences between locations. Well, that mindset that you're taught in geography works really well in a business environment, because businesses are always thinking about how is our product going to sell in this region or that country, and what's the difference in our approach as a business for how we sell in these different markets. And so I have found that basically the mindset or the worldview that I was taught in my geography classes works really, really well in a business environment. That doesn't mean other fields don't either. I know so many people who are like backgrounds in psychology, sociology, astrophysics. I mean, all kinds of backgrounds, even historians. I know an astronomer. There's all these different backgrounds that found their way into the game industry because they all had a certain way of looking at the world that was useful to this particular field. So my point is that I think it's really important to figure out what your passion is. What are you super interested in? What is the thing that really drives you? You can't stop thinking about it. It's something that you always come back to no matter what you're doing, whether you're working or playing or something, and you're always thinking about it. So identifying what that is really important. Now, especially when we're younger, that could be 5 different things in any given day. But eventually you might find that there's a theme that's coming through. Like for me, the theme was this idea of culture and travel and technology. So how can I bring those interests together in a job somehow? And so it's a term that I always that you call confluence. So the term confluence being bringing together all these things that you're interested in. And that was always my desire. I even remember way back in high school using that word, saying, someday I just want to find confluence. I want to find where all of my interests come together. And so I think it's important to figure out what you're really interested in, and then what other things also drive you. So like for me, for example, I love geography and I love cartography, but I also love technology. And I also love things that are geeky. Like I said, Star Wars and Star Trek and all this other stuff. So for me, working in video games, it's a perfect combination of everything I love, because I've got the geek stuff with all the game characters and everything. I've got technology I'm working with, and I'm able to do my culturalization work, which brings in the geography aspect. So so basically I figured out a way, and it was not by intention. I kind of walked backwards into this, but eventually I found my place and I created my place. And so I think it's important for people to think through what their interests really are and what drives them, because ultimately that's what you want to hang the rest of your career on, is that passion more than anything.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important message for parents, teachers, and school guidance counselors, because we hear this over and over again, my team and I, that these people don't know how to advise kids. And I think if you go with your passion and this concept of confluence, then you're in a good place to actually take
Yes.
advantage of things. So that's
Yeah.
really great. Yeah.
Well, I can give you a quick example of my own daughter. So she started out of high school. She wanted to do aerospace engineering, just like I started out. And she was very good at math and science. She's really excellent in those fields. And so she went into aerospace engineering and did that for 3 years at a really good college. And then after 3 years, she approached me and said, you know what? I like this topic, but I don't love it. And so my first question as a parent was, okay, so what do you love? What is your driving passion that you can't get out of your head? And her response, without hesitation, was costume design. And she'd always been good at creating costumes, and she and I cosplay together. We have a lot of fun cosplaying at different events together. And so I knew she was really good at it, but it was for her, I always thought it was like a hobby, but for her, it was actually the main thing that she really wanted to do. And so I encouraged her. I said, well, why aren't you doing it then? So why don't just, shift, from aerospace into costume design and just go there. And that's exactly what she did. So she is a professional costume designer now, and she absolutely loves her work. but she still loves space, and she still loves all the aerospace things as well.
So maybe one day, who knows, she'll be
Who
designing,
knows?
I don't know, designing suits or something for space. You never know.
She could be.
That's great. And it's so wonderful that you as a parent, you know, I can imagine some parents were like, oh, but you were just like, just follow your passion. And that's a really important message that we have to get out to adults and kids' lives.
Yes.
For sure. For
It
sure.
is. I mean, yeah, we had a little bit of a shock because we just spent 3 years of student loans on aerospace engineering school, but but ultimately I'm just like, I'm really happy that she found her passion and she went with it. That's
Yeah.
what's really important.
And you never know where this road is going to take her. You know,
No.
you just never know. So that's fantastic. I have one last question for you. This has been an amazing, amazing interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What specific advice can you give to parents, teachers, school guidance counselors in terms of helping kids to follow their passions and to develop skills to pursue some kind of career related to tech or not? And if you could be as specific as possible, because this is really important for people to know.
Well, I think first and foremost, I would say, as hard as it may be for parents and adults, try not to have any sense of judgment when a kid comes to you and says, this is what I want to do. Don't laugh at it. Don't smirk at it. Don't say, oh, like, really? Are you kidding? You know, listen to them intently, kind of going back to my earlier point about being a good listener. And I think it's really important because so many parents, I know it's hard, but we often imprint upon our kids what we would like them to do or what we think is best for them to do. But we
Guilty.
don't know. You know, I mean, those kids, I mean, we love our children and they are their own people though. And we have to let them be their own people, and we have to allow them to come into their own interests, whether or not we like it, you know. But ultimately, I think we should like it, because what I guess for me, I was really instilled with that inspiration from my own parents, who were just incredibly supportive. You know, they're both school teachers, like I mentioned, and they had always told my brother and I, like, we don't really care what you end up doing. We just hope that you love what you're doing. That's what we really care about, is that you're doing something that really, you know, interests you and drives your passion. And so I tried to do that with my own daughter. I try and send that same message with any kid that I talk to, or I mentor a lot of people in our industry. And so I think it's really important for teachers and parents to be really good listeners. And so if a kid tells you something like, this is what I'm really interested in, then do whatever you can. The next step after listening to them and not judging them, the next step is like, how can you help them? How can you connect them with resources? I mean, one of the best things I've seen is where if a parent, and I've seen this happen a lot, and it's great examples, like if a kid says, I would love to be, you know, I'd love to be a doctor. I really like medicine. I think it's really cool. Well, you know, so they make an appointment with their doctor and they actually bring their kid there strictly for the purpose of having a chance to talk to the doctor about being a doctor, you know, and having that opportunity. And I think so that's, to me, is a responsibility of adults, is that if you hear a child express an interest in an area, then our responsibility is to help them, connect them with those areas of interest. Now, like I mentioned before, they may change their mind, which is completely great. That's valid. They're you know, allowed to change their minds. There's nothing wrong with that. So, but allow them to do that, you know, because I mean, that's one of the fantastic things about being a kid, is you have the freedom to explore, and you have and you should have the freedom to explore. I guess that's ultimately what I'm trying to say here, is that adults should allow kids the freedom to explore their path, and whatever path they choose, we should be there to support them and connect them with resources that help them learn more about that.
Yeah, I love that. And it you know, it resonates with me because my son has always been crazy about trains, trams, and metros. So we
Awesome.
first lived in Canada where there was no trains, it was just car. And we moved to the center of Amsterdam, and like literally every 2 minutes there's a tram going by.
Oh yeah.
So he would
Yeah.
sit in the window, like I really would have to close the drapes because he would just be like, at age 4, this is amazing, this is amazing. And then we started taking trams. He knows the city so well. We would
Oh
take
yeah.
every Sunday a whole tram line, so he would memorize the stops. And then we started planning all of our holidays around this. And I remember one summer we were in Paris and we went to visit all of the main train stations.
That's
Just so he
cool.
can. So I understand, and it's so true, because now he's totally into urban planning and urban design and stuff, and he's only He's just starting high school. So it's
Yeah.
amazing what you say, and you just have to feed it and feed it. He did come back and say, oh, I'd like to be a tram driver, and I'm guilty. I said, you know what? That's a great profession for the weekends. How about train engineer? So I'm guilty. I'm guilty
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because a couple years ago I was doing a consulting project and I lived in Breda in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
and so I know the Dutch train system very well. I know Amsterdam very, very well. So
Oh,
yeah,
good.
it brings back a lot of good memories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Kate, this has been so amazing. I think this is super important for especially kids, but adults to hear as well. So I very much appreciate your time. And I am now going to dive into culturalization because this is a fascinating area as well. Thank you for your
Awesome.
time. And I just hope to be in touch with you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.